Well, it was time for a major overhaul of this thing. I've had this thing for a while, did a couple videos on it a few years back. I think I built it 4 years ago and had a couple things happen, and I came into some parts, and so decided it was time for an overhaul of this thing. So I didn't really do a very in-depth walk around of this thing of what I did even before, so I thought I would this time. This might be a little bit longer of a video to give some detail, but here we go. I'm gonna do it anyways. So this is my 1993 Chevy Suburban 3/4 ton. I bought it. It was completely bone stock. It had a TBI 454, 480E, MP 241 that was a floor shift, and then a 14 bolt in the rear with 373 gears. So that's what this thing was when I first bought it. And the reason why I bought it, I bought it for $2,900. I had like 190,000 miles on it. I drove it home. Actually drove it stock for a few months. But my plan was to do a solid axle swap. That's what I wanted to do on one of these GMT 400s. And I wanted this thing to be, I've mainly used it as my hunting rig, and I tow my boat with it sometimes. I actually took it on a trip to Colorado, from Idaho to Colorado, Idaho to southern Utah and back. So I've gotten a lot of use out of it, which is pretty sweet, but it was time for an overhaul. So I guess I'll talk about what I did first again. So it all started with I had a buddy who had this Dana 60. So this was an 89 Dana 60 out of an 89 Ford, and it was a dually axle. I wanted to make it single rear wheel. I did some research and found out that actually these Ford Dana 60s are way easier to convert to single rear wheel than Chevy Dana 60s. All I had to do was find some mid-90 Dana 50 twin traction beam hubs, and they're the exact same hub as a single rear wheel Dana 60 of these years. And so the hub just bolts on. So apparently they use the same spindles, all that stuff. So twin traction beam Dana 50 hub, and also rotors, and then was able to use the existing brakes that were on this thing, as far as calipers, all that type of stuff. So converted to single rear wheel. It also had 410 gears in it. If you remember, I said this thing had 373s, so I'll get to that in a little bit, but 410 gears. I also just recently replaced the tie rod. So these Fords, they actually have a factory bent like tie rod that are really goofy, really weird, and I really wanted to get rid of that. So my brother had some tie rod tubing laying around that he gave me. I went and bought these Chevy tie rod ends from, I believe it was Rough Stuff, but they're the 1-inch offset. So I needed that to be able to clear the cover when I was full lock to lock. Now, the snouts on the knuckles for these Ford Dana 60s are a little bit smaller as far as the bolt hole, and so my brother had a reaming tool, so I was able to use his reaming tool, and I reamed them out to accept the Chevy 1-ton tie rod ends. So that was cool. And then I also already had this set up for a steering stabilizer, the little bracket and everything. It actually came off my Blazer when I very first bought it, when I went to Hydro Assist, and I've kept it for all these years, and this ended up being perfect. So I actually just built my own mount and welded it to the axle, steering stabilizer, and yeah, so that was pretty good. Now I have a beefier tie rod and not that factory bent one. So I think I said this in the other video, but so I went with Off-Road Designs solid axle swap kit. So this 89 one has the wider spring perches, so it's the 36.5, I think, whatever spring perch width. In the end, I'm actually really glad that I did that I went with that axle, because it is super stable. It's obviously a lot wider than, say, a earlier gen Ford or a Chevy axle, where obviously you can get some sway because the spring perches are a little bit more narrow. This thing is super stable, and then add to the fact that these GMT 400s in the rear have a wider spring width as well. So I mean, this thing with no sway bar on it whatsoever is crazy stable. I feel like it's just as stable as it was completely stock with IFS in the front. So that's pretty cool. Also, I did not have to cut my cross member. A lot of people, when you go with the narrow axle, you end up having to notch this and stuff like that to get it to clear the leaf spring. I didn't, so that was kind of nice. So the ORD brackets do give you 3 inches of lift just with the bracket. And then those are 2-inch Tough Country Easy Ride, the 47-inch length, you know, designed for a square body front spring. So I should be at about 5 inches of lift total on this thing. Steering it's the stock box. I did an ORD drop pitman arm and then an ORD drag link over to, you know, ORD basically crossover steering. So what's kind of nice about using one of these axles is that it's a kingpin axle. So, you know, doing crossover steering is similar to any old Chevy axle. So that was really easy and nice. Steering is very nice on this thing. One thing I just did, so it used to have a white bumper. This thing was like all painted white when I first got it. I just painted the whole front end black. I think it looks better. I also just installed this front hitch. All I did was use some tubing that I had laying around, went and got that front hitch and then welded it in where I wanted it. Made some bracings, not only right there, but also on the frame, stuff like that. And that's so, I'll show you in a little bit, I have a winch and a cradle that I can put on this thing now. I also have another vehicle that has a front hitch, so I can kind of swap the winch from one rig to another, so that's very nice. One of the things also, so this, and I painted black here, as you can see. I was okay with the white for a while, but then I decided, screw it. I got rid of the white mirrors. They were white. I put some black ones on. Painted, you know, the fender flares and also just below the line there, and I think it looks really good now. They are 35, 1250, 17 Pro Comp MT2s on some 17 by 9 Pro Comp rims. Backs, I can't remember back spacing. I think it's 4 1/4 back spacing. I'll get to the rear in a little bit. I also built these, I guess you can call them sliders slash steps. So this thing is I plan on taking it on some mild wheeling trails, but it's kind of a do-it-all rig. So I decided my wife was getting freaking irritated jumping into this thing. So I ended up not only when I built these sliders, but I built these little steps out of some metal that I had laying around as well. So these do go over and weld to the frame, but they're actually very handy steps. Sure, I give up a little bit on some ground clearance, but I kind of figured for what this thing is going to be used for, it's well worth it, and so far it has been. I'm actually very glad I put those steps on there. They're just out of some, crap, I can't remember. I think it was 2x6, and I kind of cut them up to shape them, make them look good, cap the ends, and then just welded them straight to the bottom. And they're pretty nice. I like them. Really nice. On the rear, it's, like I said, it had a 14 bolt already in the rear. So it had 373 gears in it. I just went and literally bought from some guy a full 14 bolt that was out of like a late 70s Chevy pickup, mainly because it had 410 gears in it and an open diff. And I literally just pulled the carrier out, pulled the pinion support, the whole pinion and everything out, and literally just bolted it in here. Actually got, you know, set backlash, and then literally got a better pattern than what was in the thing doing it that way. So it's the existing housing, but with the 410 carrier and pinion and everything from another axle swapped into it. And and that's been great. So now I have, you know, 410s front and rear. It is an open differential. I might put a Spartan locker in the front just for when I'm off-road, just to have, you know, at least one axle that has both turning. But you know, when obviously I'm driving on the street, unlock the hubs, it's not spinning. I very well might do that. We'll see. As you can see, I actually did a disc brake swap on this. So again, these axles are narrower than even a square body or a GMT 800 14 bolt. So one thing I did do, probably can't see it, I did do wheel spacers in the rear, 1.5 inch wheel spacers, and that's what, I mean, it makes it that literally the width of the front and the width of the rear axle by doing it like that are almost identical. So that's very nice. Glad I did that. It also, too, the other thing is that the wheel studs on these are like a weird metric. And obviously the front axle is a normal standard wheel stud for a lug nut, and going to the wheel spacers allowed me to convert that so that way it's the same lug nut, you know, front and rear. That was also a bonus. I did a shackle flip in the rear. It's an ORD 4-inch shackle flip, and then those are 5-inch DIY shackles. And then at the same time I did, you might be able to see it in there, I did an easy inch, and then I actually moved the axle back 1 inch with the easy inch because shackle flips tend to move the axle forward a little bit, and that made it that the axle is completely centered in the wheel well, exactly like it was stock. It's virtually level, so that should get me, it actually has just an ever so slight rake to the front, which is what I want because I do tow some stuff with this thing. I tow my boat with it. I plan on towing that Shasta over there with it. So, it is great. So the other thing, I might have mentioned it in the other video, the GMT 400s, the earlier ones, so 88 to 94, I believe, they did the shifter for an automatic transmission is a mechanical one that kind of pivots off the frame, just like a square body. In 95, I believe, is when they updated the interior, and then 96 is obviously Vortec versions and up. Those ones, those have factory cable shifters for an automatic, and it's very obvious that Off-Road Designs designed their whole solid axle kit off of either a manual truck or the newer GMT 400s with the cable shifter, because this back bracket off the frame here was totally contacting and in the way of my factory shifter. So it meant that I had to get a new shifter. When I very first did this, one of my last videos, I think I showed I went with a Winters, you know, gate shifter. Well, it turned out that the gate shifter, for some reason, Winters shifters do not match up with the detents of a 4L80E worth of crap. I don't know why. I found a bunch of threads of other people saying they had the same problem. I even tried to do like a different arm off the transmission to try and help. It helped a little bit, but it's still, the gears never matched up with the gates. So added to that, I mean, it was fine for a while because with the 4L80E that was in it, I could just, most of the time I was just putting it in drive and going, and I got those to match up just fine, so it was fine. But last year, in fact, during hunting, my transmission I actually lost fourth gear, and I kept driving it because it was hunting season and I wasn't going to stop hunting. So I kept driving it as a 3-speed for like a month. And then third started slipping, and I was like, gosh dang it. I was like, all right, I have to do something now. Just so happened that my brother had a 2000 Suburban that he was parting out. He was taking the 6.0 and putting it in another project. And then he had a year 2000 4L80E that had a lot of miles on it, but was completely functioning properly as it should. So he said, hey, you can have it if you want. And I was like, dang, that's what I'm talking about. That would actually be great even if this one goes on me in a year or two, I would rather rebuild a later version 4LEDE, because when I did some research on these early versions, 92 and 93 4LEDEs, they had a couple small differences as far as some internals and a couple other things that I was like, man, if I'm going to rebuild one, I'd rather it be a later version. And so, and then this one was running, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take that. Sounds great. The other thing, though, is that my factory wiring harness would not work with this one because there are some differences in the plug for an early version 4LEDE and a couple other things. So all of this combined, I was like, all right, fine. I'm just going to put, for now, one of those Jake's Performance kits in it, where it's a simple little wiring harness that converts it to a full manual valve body. I did the same thing on my C10 street strip, and it surprisingly works really, really well to drive around on the street. And they're really cheap. They're like 150 bucks. And I was like, I'll just do that for now. Maybe later on down the road when I want to spend some money and get a actual standalone harness for it and a controller for it, I'll do that. But so I was just going to swap this thing in here. I bought that Jake's Performance kit, and then at the same time, knowing it was going to be full manual valve body, I ended up getting a different shifter. And I built a little mount for it off the floor, and got one of these B&M designed for 4LEDE like detent shifters. This one matches up perfectly to the detents in the transmission. It really good. So now it's actually in a better position on the floor, where when I got my arm right here on the armrest, it's like very comfortable to shift it up and down the gears. That's very nice. That button here, this is for the torque converter lockup. This kit that I bought actually comes with an auto mode, so I can swap it to auto and it'll click in and out of torque converter lockup automatically in fourth, or I can do it manual by clicking it down. So up auto, middle off, down manual, and then that's just a little light to tell me when torque converter lockup is engaged. So again, if you're going to do one of these solid axle swaps on a 88 to 94, you're probably going to run into this issue where you might need to get a different transmission shifter because it hits the factory one. So that's kind of irritating, but whatever. This thing's actually not bad in here. It actually has the bucket seats, the captain's chairs in the middle, which at first I didn't like, but the more I've had it, I actually love it. It makes getting in and out of the back way easier, way nicer for the kids or for hunting. Somebody sitting in the back, being able to jump out of the truck very quick is way nice. And in the back, so there's my winch. We'll keep in the back of here, throw onto whatever truck I need to, stuff like that. So when you don't cruise Facebook Marketplace if you are not serious about buying something, because then you're going to find something that's an amazing deal and then you have to buy it even though you didn't want to. So when I was about to start the transmission swap, and this again, it had a TBI, this thing had a TBI 454 in it that was running. I had issues with the distributor, had to swap out a distributor. But then after I got that, then it ran like a champ. Obviously it's a TBI 454. It's nothing to write home about. Didn't really make a lot of power. Did okay, made okay torque. Kind of did what I needed to do, but my plan was to originally just literally do a top end kit on the 454. I was going to do, heads, cam, intake, and then probably aftermarket injection. Nothing too crazy, not like a crazy cam. I just wanted to get more power out of it, make it run a little bit better, all that. And then I was like, I was cruising Facebook Marketplace when I shouldn't have been. And I found a dude that was local to me that had an 8.1 liter. Yep, there's another 8.1 liter because I, for some reason, keep on coming into these things for cheap. Completely unknown miles, completely unknown, like condition, anything like that. Did not come with a wiring harness. It was actually missing the the bracket here for the alternator and the power steering pump. And was a little bit crusty because it was sitting in some dude's yard. But I talked him down to $600. And when he said, yeah, sure, I was like, gosh dang it. Now I have to do this. Ridiculous. I was able to get the motor to spin too, and it sounded like it had compression. And I'm like, well, that's half the battle. The other reason why I decided to do this is because I carb swapped a different 8.1 that's in my C10. You can go watch other videos of that. Well, then I had a complete standalone wiring harness and computer with a tune already, because it was with that motor that I carb converted, just hanging around in my shop. I had a buddy who literally just gave me this bracket for the alternator, so I sourced that. I mean, he just gave it to me. Really nice guy. Jordan Reagan, you're the man. And I sat there and I looked at it and I was like, this thing's already a big block truck. So, you know, everything that I had in this before, the cooling system, the exhaust, like everything, it's like, oh my gosh, this will be a crazy cheap swap for me because I have all the expensive parts. So I bought it and here we go. So I put another 8.1 liter in this burb. I literally just today drove it out of the shop. There's a couple small tweaks and crap that I gotta do, small little things to fix, stuff like that, but it's running, it's moving. I pulled it out of the shop, drove it up and down the road, it's shifting, it's running, everything. So this one's a little bit different than my other two. This one, I actually have a mechanical throttle body. As you can see, this is a Vortec 454 throttle body. Those bolt up to 8.1s completely just fine. I had all of this crap in my shop, so it made this swap crazy simple. The throttle cable is off of a 97 Tahoe, and then this bracket right here is actually off an early 5.3 truck, 5.3 or 6.0 truck that had cable throttle. This is the bracket that I literally just modified, bolted it off the intake, and then, you know, have throttle, stuff like that. Here's, you know, my computer, my wiring harness is all over here. Just a couple random things. I built this, well, I bought a kit for an air intake for like a 6.0 truck, and then kind of cut it up, modified it, and made it work with mine. So the harness that I had for this, that's a standalone. This is actually a Howell harness, so they built it from scratch. Like I said, I literally have had this thing for years, this Howell harness, computer, and everything. And we were originally going to use it for a different project, didn't end up doing that, so I just had it sitting in my shop, and this was set up for a mechanical throttle body. So as you can see, it has the hookups that Howell put in it for throttle position sensor, idle air control, stuff like that. So pretty crazy simple, actually. It's the stock big block radiator. I did get different hoses for upper and lower because obviously they're in different positions. So the exhaust, I literally just unbolted the exhaust manifolds from the TBI 454 that was in this thing and bolted them on to this 8.1. That way I didn't have to do anything with my exhaust, which I had already done exhaust on this thing years ago, when I did the solid axle swap. And so all my exhaust bolted up. All I had to do was actually just drill holes and add O2 sensors for the 8.1. So welded on some bungs, and that was it. And yeah, this thing has rear heat, so it did actually have this weird thing where there's so many hoses over here for the rear AC. And the one that I needed actually like has this weird, you know, loop on it. So I kind of have this big long one so that it doesn't kink or anything, and it seems to work just fine. I'll probably leave it. It's not a big deal. But yeah, anywho, so this Suburban now has I know that this motor is an 04 and up 8.1, just based off of the timing gear that I looked at, the fact that it had EGR delete, all that type of stuff. Oh, when I replaced the injectors on my blue crew cab with upgraded ones, I swapped those good stock injectors onto this one. I had this nicer fuel rail literally hanging around. It's kind of nice when I've done so many freaking 8.1 swaps that I just had parts laying around to put this thing together relatively cheap. So pretty awesome. I'm pretty happy with it. Obviously, I mean, even though the exhaust is, you know, stock manifolds, it has a little bit smaller throttle body that's mechanical. I don't really care. All I was trying to do was get a little bit more power out of this thing, which I did for way cheaper with this 8.1 swap because of all my parts I had laying around versus doing a build on the 454. I mean, I still have the 454. I'll probably build it and put it in something else, but it kind of makes this thing even cooler, more unique. So it's an 04 and up 8.1 now, a year 2000 480E, that's full manual valve body, stock transfer case, which is the 241. I guess I never showed exhaust. Exhaust is really simple. It's literally just straight off the manifolds and then just straight all the way back and then dumps right before the axle. Sounds pretty good. I had a lot of people when I first did it that were like, "Oh, don't you get a lot of fumes in this with it not going out the back?" And it's like, nope. This thing's actually sealed up really good. So, yeah, we don't get any fumes, don't get nothing. Sounds good. But there it is. Big old refresh on the old solid axle swap burb. And now it's a little bit more detailed about what I did on this thing. I'm sure there's other stuff I'll do to it as time goes on. Maybe build a roof rack for it. That might be kind of cool. Maybe keep a spare tire up there when we're going camping, stuff like that. But there we go. Hope you like it. One thing I forgot to mention was the fuel system of what I did on this one. This obviously was already a TBI fuel injected truck, so all I did in the back, it's obviously the stock 40-gallon tank, and I ended up pulling up the carpet. In fact, so underneath this, I pulled up the carpet and cut a hole in there so that it makes it that this thing's crazy easy serviceable if I ever have a pump go out. And I installed, same as my blue crew cab, I installed an EP381 fuel pump. So it is Vortec pressure, but it's the size of an old TBI pump, so it fits inside a TBI hanger. So did that in the back, and then all I did, so most of the lines from the tank all the way up to the filter are factory. They're the factory TBI ones. And then, you know, here's the filter right here, and then you can see I actually found these two adapters. So these adapters convert the fittings for both the feed, so here's the feed, here's the return, to -6. So whatever, I can't remember what these are, but whatever the fitting was that is here and here, these are that fittings to then a -6. And then I made my own lines from here that go up and come up to a fuel pressure regulator. This is a little bit different than my blue crew cab because my blue crew cab has a return style fuel rail on it, where the rail, they only did that in, what was it, 01, I think it was 01, 2, and 3 on 8.1s. They actually had a return off of the rail. So my 8.1, and then, you know, that right there is actually a fuel pressure regulator on those versions that keep it at the 60 PSI that it needs and then shoves the rest out of a return. So that's how my blue crew cab is that it's just feed and return right there. Well, the later versions, these ones are returnless. So that's why I went to this fuel pressure regulator. And then obviously, you know, have my one line that comes over and hooks up there with a little adapter on the line. And then, you know, I just basically adjust this to 60 pounds. And then this has the return in it, obviously. And that's how I did fuel system on this. So I realized after I ended the last video that I should probably show fuel system of what I did. This one was way even easier than what I did on my Blue Crew cab as far as setting up the fueling, because I was able to, it was already a TBI truck, so that was way easy. Converting the lines was way easier with the way that they did these burbs, and I had all the stuff sitting in my shop to make these lines and these fittings from different projects. Literally all I had to do was buy that adapter, the fuel pressure regulator, and then the 2 adapters on the lines down on the frame rail, and the pump, and that's it. It actually made it really, really easy. So, anyhow, this burb is going to be friggin' awesome. I'm going to get out and use it a lot more.